Hey, everybody. I'm Jesse.
I'm Maeve.
I'm Nathan.
And I'm Andre.
And this is Boring Conversation.
Welcome to Boring Conversation, a Malifaux podcast.
Welcome back, everybody, to Boring Conversation. Today we have a full house in the recording studio. So I would like to go right around the room and introduce all of our guests. I myself, as usual, am Jesse. I am not going by an alias today. And in the studio with us, we have Maeve. Say hi to everybody, Maeve.
Hello. It's me
And
again.
we have Nathan out of the capital city area. What's up, dude?
Hey, everybody.
And Andre from Texas.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, everybody. Cool. So before we get into the meat of the episode and what we're all going to be talking about, which I'm going to kind of let Maeve take away, why don't we just kind of go down the list and see if you guys have anything that you would like to plug? I'll just start right off the top. This is the first time for the next 6 months when you're going to hear me say it basically every month, multiple times a month on every social media channel and podcast episode that I put out. But Captain Con is indeed coming up. I will be running the same events that I have the last couple of years, the Malifaux Content Creators Invitational on Friday, which is going to be the team's tournament. And then we're going to be doing a 2-day, 5-round gaining ground style grand tournament, much like you'd see at some of the other events we have coming up that we'll be talking about in just a few minutes. That's pretty much all I have coming up soon. I am going to be going to Nova, which I know some of the other folks in the recording are going to be as well. And I look forward to seeing anybody there that comes to join us. Feel free to come bug me, and I will definitely have a drink with you. But enough of that. Maeve, what do you have to plug?
So I too will be at the Nova. Unfortunately, it's unclear as to what else I'll be coming to. Captain Con is definitely on the menu. But so I would probably expect me to be there. But until then, if you really like listening to my voice, there is always the Bayou Breakdown, which has a couple more episodes coming out very soon. I just have to finish them up. And I have my own actual play podcast where we play RPGs. Our friend Nathan here was in the first season, so check it out. It's really cool. Other than that, I am terminally online, so you can probably find me anywhere on Discord or Facebook or Twitter or whatever if you want to talk to me.
Nice. Nathan, what do you have going on, sir?
All right, so, well, Maeve already talked about Rotting on the Vine, which we did on Foxtail Games. So it was a lot of fun. We're really proud of what we came up with, so I encourage everyone to check it out. You can catch me on Third Floor Wars Court of Blades stream. We just did our 4th episode of that, and it's really fun. We have the creator of the game GMing that one, and it's just been excellent. And then I'm going to be running the Bonanza Brawl at Nova, so come on around and I'll run that for you.
Hell yeah. And then Andre, your meta has a pretty slick event coming up pretty soon too. Why don't you tell us about it?
Yes, we do. It's going to be the Lone Star Down Malifaux GT. It's going to be running between October 13th through the 15th. If you register before August 25th, you even get this custom Fate deck that we got signed up for you. There are currently already 26 players signed up, so we're expecting some real solid turnout. And 16 of those are from out of state. So we have a lot of people coming to take that biggest hat. So definitely look forward to that and try to make it down if you can. It's going to be a good event. Doug always runs a real good one. Beyond that, I am still a part of the Malifaux World Series Committee for Rules. We are still alive, and we are in fact still running events. If you would like to stay at home and play Malifaux, that is still an option available to you, and I am still sadly chained to the rock, making rules adjudications as appropriate. So those are my fields of expertise to plug for.
Nice. Yeah, I'm really
I-
looking forward to the Lone Star Showdown in particular.
Yeah, I hear they're even
I'm gonna be
getting
going.
Dixon to come all the way from Puerto Rico to
Indeed.
play.
Indeed, he
Yep.
And then
will
I
be
know
there.
Ambrose is coming all
International.
the way. Ambrose is coming all the way from Washington State. Is
Mhm.
Puerto Rico technically international?
I mean,
I do-
we are walking a line there for sure.
You do need a passport to go to Puerto Rico, so
See,
You do?
that's the bar.
I didn't know that. Learn
Yeah.
new things.
Also, if you're worried about me gatekeeping the podium, I will actually not be there at the Lone Star GT because my second daughter, Anya, should be born about the same weekend ish. So I will not be leaving the Austin area because my wife would kill me if she could waddle over to me and stab me. So come on down. The water's fine.
I will be in a similar boat because my first grandchild will be being born around that same time as well. So
That's awesome.
my daughter would murder
Congratulations.
me if I got on a plane to Houston.
Yeah, I'll be gunning for a solid mid-table finish at that event. It's going to be a great time. Really looking forward to it. So we've got a bunch of great events coming up here in the next few months. I mean, we're rapidly approaching what I consider to be kind of like peak tournament season, and I'm really looking forward to going to a lot more local events as well. The best thing that I could best piece of advice that I could give to anybody listening is make sure that you are doing your best to support your local tournament organizer. The summer can be a really tough time to run events. It's very tough to get people's schedules lined up. And sometimes it can be a little frustrating by the time, August is pretty much done and back to school is rolling around because people's schedules have been hectic and difficult to line up. So, do your best to attend the events that you can, go to your local gaming store to game nights, and just keep flipping cards. Makes a huge, huge difference.
For
So,
sure.
with all that said, why don't we just kind of share what we're drinking before we get into the meat of the episode, shall we?
Yeah.
So I myself am have a new beer today. This one is called Lawson's Finest Liquids Kiwi Double IPA. Lawson's is one of my absolute favorite breweries. They're out of the great state of Vermont. This particular beer says 8.1% ABV, brewed with a massive charge of New England-grown Nelson Sauvin and Pacific Jade hops. Kiwi Double IPA brings you the terroir of our hop-loving friends in the southern hemisphere. And I won't bother to read the whole rest of it because I'll be here for 5 minutes. Long story short, very, very good beer. I'm happy I picked up a 4-pack of it. Maeve, what do you got?
Yeah, I just finished up. I'm not drinking it now, but I just finished up a Tiki Haze craft cider from the Atlanta Hard Cider Company. It's really good. It's like it's kind of like a base cider, but it's got like pineapple and mango, and it's pretty fantastic. So I picked it up when I was in Atlanta the other month, and I'm finishing off the pack now.
Nathan, what do you got?
I've got a Coke Zero today. I'm not a drinker myself, so that's gonna be what I got.
It's all good. Coke's great. And then Andre, how about you?
I myself am enjoying a fine 2023 Diet Dr. Pepper.
Nice.
There's a museum out in Waco, Texas, that does a lot of Dr. Pepper themed stuff there, so I highly recommend to check that one out as well.
I have a soft spot for Dr. Pepper.
Mm,
I was like
good
the
man.
only person in my friend group that loved it. And everybody else would get, in like middle school and high school, everybody would get, Coke or Pepsi. And I'd be the one dude getting Dr. Pepper. Everybody would make fun of me. But
That right there's like 30% of being a Texan, so come on down.
Makes me in barbecue too.
Mm.
Cool. So, Maeve, why don't you tell us what we're all here to talk about tonight?
All right. So this is kind of our part of our series that we're doing on, sort of working into how do we get better at tournaments? How do we prep for tournaments better? Because so much of Malifaux is done before we ever really hit the table. And thinking about what we're bringing, how we look at pools, that sort of thing is all It all happens, especially when you're going to a big tournament. Like you said, we're talking about tournament season coming up. So, Gen Con just happened. We got Nova coming up. We've got the Texas GT coming up. We've got Captain Con, and then we'll be back around to Adepticon, those sort of things. So, what I really wanted to talk about was how do you choose what you're going to play? Because when you travel, you want to make sure you have everything put together. You want to make sure you know what you're going to bring. Um, you want to be pretty well versed on like what kind of a player do I want to be. And there's really two very distinct play styles that I want to talk about tonight. And one is the person that always brings a single keyword and just plays one keyword and plays it until they're done with it. Then they go to the next keyword and play the next keyword. And the other is the person who digs into a faction and plays every master in the faction, every keyword, and really like gets into the depth of the faction. And I don't think either of these play styles are wrong. But I did want to tonight talk about like what are the pros of these and what are the cons of these, and what are some of the things that you learn when you play in these various styles. So that's why we have Andre, who is very famous for playing one keyword at a time. I mean, you played Damien through how many tournaments recently?
Including locals, there was 4 tournaments that I played Damien
Yeah.
in.
Yeah, so there was like months where you just played Damien, and then you've been on a Maxine kick for a while too. So
Oh yeah, no, she's my girl right now.
yeah, and then Nathan, you've been playing Guild since what, early second edition?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, so Nathan is a huge guild player, through thick or thin. I just I remember when like I was a kid, my grandfather was a big Braves fan, and in the '80s the Braves sucked. They were one of the worst teams in the league, but we'd always go to Atlanta, and then in the '90s they started getting good again, right? And there were all these Braves fans all of a sudden, and he was just like, nope, I've always been a Braves fan. And that's Nathan. It doesn't matter how bad or good Guild is, Nathan's a Guild player.
See, what you have to understand, I'm a Baltimore Orioles fan and a Washington football team fan. So if I didn't know how to stick with someone struggling, I would have been out a long time ago.
I mean, that is entirely fair. So so that's what I wanted to talk about, because these guys fall sort of in between my play style, which is to bring like 2 or 3 at a time, and so I thought it would be really cool to like try to help people gain the skills that they need to know to figure out which kind of player they really are. Are they going to be a keyword player or a faction player?
Cool. Yeah, and then I myself, I kind of fall. I kind of span the whole spectrum to a certain degree, because like I play all of Bayou. I've played a significant number of games with most of the Bayou Masters, and I feel confident in using any of them. But in some of the other factions that I play, like in Thunders, really I play like I say I play Thunders, I really play like 2 keywords, and then I sprinkle in a little bit of a couple other ones. And then as an Explorers player, I play Ivan, and that's it. So yeah, I think it's going to be a really cool conversation. And I do think that it's going to kind of arc out a little bit of the tournament prep mindset, and also kind of help out folks that are maybe just looking to get into the game.
Yeah,
I think it's very easy for somebody to get into Malifaux, and people tell them that it's a low barrier to entry, that it's not going to cost a lot of money to start playing. And sometimes people, if they've come from like a larger scale war game like 40K or War Machine or something like that, they tell you, okay, I'm going to play Arcanists. Okay, cool. So you make some suggestions for where to start, but they think that, oh, well, I just need to buy all the Arcanists. I have to have everything. And then they end up with a monstrous pile of boxes, or they spend a ton of time assembling stuff. They get 3 games in and they realize that it's going to take them 5 to 10 games to learn one master. And then they have to do that again for each one of the masters in the faction. And it can get very overwhelming. And I've actually seen it turn some people off. So hopefully this is going to be useful to both tournament players and the newer players, or the more casual players, or even some folks that are just looking to get into a new faction.
Absolutely.
So I'd like to kind of speak to all of those different aspects of the playing a faction versus playing a keyword.
Yeah. So Andre, I think the first thing I want to talk about is what, like I said, like we said, you've been known to really dig into a single keyword and
Mhm.
play that keyword. What is it that draws you to that play style?
I think for me, the biggest draw of one tricking is being able to get to a point where I no longer have to play the game against myself in the middle of a situation where I'm having to think about what my opponent is doing. Because at least for me personally, if I had to bring a whole faction and do an Iron Scorpius or something like that, pretty much any game I drop down, even if I've put 5 or 10 games on each master, previously in a wealth of experience, I'm still like, okay, so wait a minute, what suit is that trigger again? Like stuff like that, that can start getting me tripped up in the middle of a game. But if I am one tricking something, I know every trigger on every card without having to look at it. I know the movement, I know the ranges for everything, and that just comes with being able to say that I've played this crew, 3 dozen times in the last 2 months or whatever, and I'm not going to be swayed on like having missed out a part of my toolkit or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So one tricking lets you know a crew way better than you would normally know a crew, in my experience, in a multi-crew setting to an approach in a tournament. And then at the same time, it also forces you, that is to say, one tricking forces you to learn how to adapt to some suboptimal situations. So if I'm just going to pick keywords out of the air, but if I was a Hoffman one tricker and I was forced to try to run, symbols of authority or some strategy that forces me to dive down the board, um, then Hoffman doesn't really do that. He's kind of built for tanking and spanking. And so it's like, all right, cool. Well, if I'm one tricking Hoffman, I literally have to come up with an answer to this. Like, what do I do? And oftentimes I find that when being forced to play those games, you find out combinations and approaches using models that aren't necessarily what they're designed for, but often end up doing quite a good pinch hitter role, that even in the games where they're doing what they're meant to be doing, you can still use that knowledge in a backup kind of way. Like, oh, well, based on my experience having to windmill slam Hoffman into a symbols game, I know that hunters are probably pretty good at going to be able to spread them out or something like that. And I think for me, the biggest actual example that I have is that Maxine, while she has a bunch of support actions, I get so much time on the table of her just shooting things off the table, because I've been forced to do so. When I have to play a killy game and I'm still playing support Trixie, Schemy Master, Maxine, she, loads all 6 rounds of the revolver and just starts pulling a trigger. And she turns out she's actually pretty good at it, even though no one looks at Maxine's card and goes, oh, that's shooting master. So I think those are, I would say, the two biggest appeals to me that come to mind when one tricking.
And I
I
want
have
to
to
put a
look up
pin
Maxine in the app right now because I legit forgot that she had a gun.
a gun.
Exactly.
A gun with an amazing trigger too. It's not like that
exactly.
gun's got a great
Oh
trigger.
wow, that's pretty
But I
good.
wanna-
It's got draw out secrets and a
Yeah.
dope ass unique
Yeah.
trigger. I like it.
I want to put
All
a
right.
pin in that conversation and bring it back around in a little bit because there is something I want to talk about with sort of the Malifaux mindset of trying to play to counters and trying to play to play for the matchup, and I think that's a really interesting conversation I want to come back to. But Nathan, you've been playing Guild for as long as you've had the game. I think I remember you saying you picked up Nekema once and was like, I'm going to do this, and then didn't. And I know I almost had you convinced to play Sommer, and they nerfed him immediately after you picked him up, and you just never touched him again. So what is it that has you so interested and so deep into your faction?
Point of order before Nathan answers that. Hold on, I need to know. Did somebody tell Weird that Nathan picked up Summer so that
It's gotta be. That's what it is.
Or like, is it his fault? Really?
It might. It is your fault.
This adds up.
God, A2 Brute. Like, did you?
That one felt good for once because I knew I was about, like, we had just gotten titles revealed and I was like, I was on my way out anyways. But I remember looking at the card and being like, wow, that's really unfortunate. Now I'd feel bad giving these models to someone.
Yeah.
And it turns out, yeah, it was real bad. But no, I did a little bit of that. I've done a tiny bit of Neverborn, mostly Lucius, a tiny bit of Nekoma, um, because in Chewy I bought some Nekoma stuff and um, some Lilith stuff and used Nekoma a fair amount in my Lucius cruise then. But really, that's only because Lucius was my first love, and we went from there. Um, I don't do one master because I'd lose my mind. I don't have the take a list and make incremental changes to make it good. I think of it as the Magic the Gathering school of list building. But I pretty much have to throw some weird stuff together and see if it works. And that means I'm going to be jumping around masters a lot. Um, it does mean I also kind of run into the thing Andre was talking about where I'll decide I'm running this master tonight. I don't care what happens. So I do some of that. Oh, this doesn't match this master at all. What do we do with it? But I can't imagine. I don't think I have a pretty good memory, but I don't think I have the Andre level of I will be able to tell you every punctuation piece on this card. Um, but I can get 99% of my cards, I'd say, pretty consistently.
Well, and that helps after you've been playing the same set of masters for a very long time.
Yeah.
I know I'm terrible like with I have every faction. I have almost everything now except for Thunders. I don't think I have a full keyword of anything in Thunders, and I've played like 90% of it just running through it. So I keep going back to Bayou every time, but yeah, I can see like also being like I think the only keyword I ever jumped into and was like I'm going to play this a ton was Sommer in GG0, and I played so much Sommer in GG0 and GG1 that people in my meta were getting very, very tired of him. But yeah, so that gives us kind of the overview of why you guys chose that. Is there anything, Jesse, you would add to that?
Yeah, I would say, just coming from my perspective of having both a faction and then individual keywords, I knew that when I decided I was going to get into Thunders after having played Bayou and having all the masters in Bayou and getting a bunch of reps in with them, that there was no way that I was going to be able to learn an entire second faction. So I picked out my favorite master from the faction from a stylistic and lore standpoint, which was Misaki. I also thought that she had legs on the table. Well, she does, come to find out. But we've already talked about that on another episode. And I said, okay, I like Misaki a lot. I really like the style of Asami a lot. I think that she's pretty decent at the time. When I picked her up, she was a little bit more playable than she is now. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to pick my two favorites, and then I'm going to try and choose maybe one or two other masters that are going to fill some of the gaps that I can't take care of with these two keywords. So my favorite keywords were Asami and Misaki. And I said, okay, well, I don't really have a good stand and fight keyword. Mayfang 2 looks really good. I think that I'm going to branch out into Foundry. And as a bonus, I already own like 80% of the keyword because I was playing Bayou and have Mawtucket. So lucky me. And then basically after that, I had always kind of liked Qiangong, and I thought that Yoko would be able to fill a couple of gaps in the play style, especially once her second version came out. And I was like, okay, I'm pretty sure that these are going to be the four that I stick with. I might consider dabbling with some other stuff, but that dabbling has turned into a bunch of boxes of unassembled minis. So I basically said, okay, I'm going to pare down the selection. I'm not going to do the whole faction because I don't have a year and a half to try and learn every single one of these masters backwards and forwards. And I want to be able to easily switch between Thunders and Bayou. And if I dedicate all my time to Thunders, I'm going to forget stuff in Bayou. I'm not going to remember my TNs. I'm going to run into the same sort of issues that Andre mentioned with really liking kind of a kind of pared down master selection. I feel like I would lose that if I tried to get fully invested in a second faction. And then, same kind of thing happened after Explorer Society released. This actually happened before I dove into Thunders, but I looked at all the Explorer Society releases and said, Ivan looks super cool, and I love his lore. I love his style. I love the whole Dark City vibe. he also looks very strong. So I said, you know what? At the time that he released, I looked at his rules and said, I think I can do everything with this master. And by sticking primarily in keyword with a couple of key out of keyword hires, I don't really feel like I need another master to fill gaps in like a tournament lineup. So I just got him. I stuck with him. And then after a while, I decided, you know what? I'm okay with just sticking with him. And if I do play ES, it's just always going to be Ivan, to the point that I actually sold most of my other ES stuff that I had picked up. So there you go.
So Nathan, when you're heading to a tournament like Nova, what is your, since you play the whole faction, what is your general thoughts when you look at a tournament packet, see the pools, and you decide this is what I'm bringing out of everything I have access to?
So Nova last year actually changed my opinion on this. I was bringing the full bag. I Scorpiused both the Masters and the GT last event.
And you had enough. You had enough for Landon to also Scorpius with your models.
Yes, like most of the time that was like we just weren't playing the same thing at the same time.
Yeah,
but yes,
yeah.
he was Scorpiusing with my models at the same time. I actually didn't pack Frontier, but then right before the last day, I thought I was going to be playing my friend Joel, and I decided I wanted to take Frontier into him because I thought it would match up with what I thought he would run. So I ran home. I quick painted Bass too because I didn't have him painted yet, and I threw him in my bag because it's a local tournament for me. So I didn't end up actually facing him, so it didn't matter. But I was ready to throw that last one that I didn't pack in the bag. But that event did kind of, the mental energy I was spending choosing a crew match to match kind of convinced me that I don't want to do that anymore. And so by Captain Con, I packed 2 keywords and a third utility master, that being LJ2, into my bag. I took Dashel and Nelly to Captain Con, and I just went 3 masters, and I honestly was a lot happier not. Oh no, 4 because I had Sonia, but I was very happy not having 8 full keywords at the ready for me. So I definitely think that's going to be the way I go going forward, but I will probably try to look at the tournament packet and make sure I'm not leaving an obvious hole.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I know that you're pretty active on the forums, you're pretty active in most of the discords. You've kind of you're always kind of monitoring the sort of meta talk. And especially it's, when you're going to a local tournament, you generally know who you're going to play, what your opponent, your regular opponents are. You have a good idea of what they're going to bring and what their play style is. When you're going into a big tournament like Nova, and you're playing people you might only play once or twice a year, there's always, you kind of have to rely on that meta knowledge of what's good and what's that. How much does that affect the masters that you bring when you are locked into a single faction?
For me, almost none. I think it's just a lack of lack of brain power. I will think sometimes Outcast is probably the only one that really affects my master selection. That actually burnt me against Andre at Nova because I didn't realize what a machinist would do to Nelly, and that felt real bad.
Yeah.
But otherwise, and I probably will be more careful about that. But other than that, I'm not counterpicking enemy to the meta as much as I probably should be.
You're just playing to the masters you feel like will do the pools the way you want them to.
Absolutely.
Be done. Okay. And so looking at that from the opposite direction, Andre, what is it that makes you look at a keyword and go, this is the keyword that I want for this tournament?
I think the thing for me, it's dual fold. So from one side of it, from the aesthetic side, you have to make sure that the crew that you want to play is actually fun for you to play and put on the table. It sounds very cop-outy, but at the end of the day, if I'm going to have to windmill slam the same crew for the next however many man hours I'm putting into the table, make it not suck. Like, if it's boring to play, don't play it. Like, no matter how good you think it is, if it sucks to play, don't play it. But the opposite side of that is, for me personally, in order to successfully one trick, I think it's important that a keyword is able to deal with the 2 or 3 biggest meta threats you think are going to be in play, and still have enough adaptability and maneuverability to catch everything that you didn't think of, hopefully. So my current example of it right now is, of course, Maxine. I think, for me, the fun factor is out the roof. I love all of the card mechanics that they have. I love being able to, at the start of a turn, stone for a 6 high and be like, I got this. Because just the power of those card mechanics really make it work for me. And then at the same time, like, the ecstasy and agony of watching my opponent be really sad as they flip a high card, knowing that I'm going to get to use that high card on the next flip, is just like a kind of sinister joy that only Maxine can bring. So it's definitely high on the fun factor, but also very adaptable. Like, literally any condition in the game I can bring in with impromptu invention. By might of the cardmancy, I'm never like behind in terms of action control and being able to pass duels. And also with some of just really potent out of the box counter tech and stuff like Eye of the Hurricane on machinists, and then access to ruthless and irreducible damage out of Kaya. Like, it all comes together to have a package that can deal with basically anything I'm afraid of, like armor crews, or being able to get across the board because BB and Calypso are really fast, or being able to lock someone down if like it's a jackdaw. Handing that dude stunned really kills his vibe. So there's like a lot of tools in the kit that allow me to adapt to whatever my opponent does, which means that I can kind of mentally check out during like crew build stage, because I know that my crew can reasonably deal with most things as long as I can play my crew better than they play theirs. Which is where that's the lightning that I ride right there, is the gap between, I know my crew so well that no matter how well you know your crew, I'm going to be able to play better than you. And to me, that is an important part. Being able to adapt to stuff, to be able to ride that lightning, is what a crew needs to bring for me in order to one trick. Previously, Damien just had so much raw power that like you couldn't not one trick with him. And then before that, in the before times, back in GG0, Nakima had enough going around, and there weren't enough big fish in the pond to stop her from one tricking. So like, she had some tools to be able to deal with mostly everything. She was fast. She had enough damage. You could scheme in a pinch. And with 2 ancient packs, you had at least some card anything. So it all kind of came together to be a fairly adaptable package for its time. But I certainly think one tricking is getting harder as the meta progresses.
Are you mostly just bringing the same list, or do you have a couple things set aside, versatiles or out of keyword picks that are set aside for your oh crap moments?
So my big list building oh crap moments are, do I think my opponent is about to bring anti-berry tech? Because BB and Calypso are great until you have dudes with coffins punching him in space, and you're like, this could have gone better. So for like a Terra matchup or a Justice matchup, or if I think they're trying to like, if I think a cheeky outcast player is going to hire the Nothing Beast despite being Levy or something like that, then I'll swap him out for like a Mr. Nocturo hire, or stuff like that. But for the most part, like outside of the exceptions, I run the exact same list, and for Maxine. But that wasn't just like the first one I picked and then I called it good. That was, as Nathan mentioned, the MTG approach, where many iterations of list building got me to what I consider to be the most adaptable, useful Maxine crew. And so that's how I get to that point. And for the most part, I keep it static list.
Okay. Jesse, what about you when you're being kind of like me, where you're looking at taking a couple of keywords, but you're also like reaching across factions? What is it that like, first of all, what is your decision point on like, I'm bringing this faction, and then what is your decision point on which masters you're bringing?
The decision point on which faction I'm going to bring usually just comes down to me getting a wild hair up my ass and wanting to play a bunch of Misaki games or a bunch of, angler games if I'm trying to learn them. Frequently, if I'm not going to a major event, like a grand tournament, Nova Open, Lone Star Showdown, so on and so forth, a lot of times if I go to a tournament, I look at them as a way to get 3 practice games in against, in theory, increasingly competent opponents in the same day. So frequently, if I'm deciding, okay, I am ready to start learning angler, I'm going to bring the clampets, I'm going to play them at this local event, and I'm going to run them all 3 rounds. It doesn't matter what my opponents pick. It doesn't matter what the pools look like. I'm going to use them, and I'm going to make them work for the situation at hand, because that's how I learn the crew. If I'm going to a major GT, a lot of times my faction choice is going to come down to, am I honest to goodness gunning for a top slot? Am I trying to podium? If I'm trying to try and podium, I'm going to say, okay, I don't feel comfortable one-tricking. I want to have some degree of flexibility in my bag, so I'm going to pick maybe 2 or 3 keywords out of this faction that I want to bring to the event, and I want to make sure I can cover all my bases. But I often go in knowing that, like, I'm probably just going to choose this one master every time unless I get a weird matchup or a curveball. So a great example of that would be, like, if I decide that I'm going to play Bayou. I happen to be playing Bayou at Nova. If I decided, okay, I've looked over the pools, I think Zip can do all of these. I think he's the best master for this particular tournament. But I need to have some kind of a backup, because if I'm playing Zip and I happen to get paired into a Thunders, I'm going to have a problem, because they have a lot of ways that they can counter what he can bring to the table. They have access to Blow It to Hell. They have an upgrade they can put on any 2 beaters they want that just mulches Zip, and he doesn't stand a chance. And that would force me to basically stand back and use his decent but admittedly subpar gun, instead of actually getting in people's faces and tossing them around and dropping pianos everywhere. So I need to have some kind of a backup plan. So then I say, okay, well, I want to play Zip for most of these games because I feel like he's going to get the job done. If I get paired into Thunders, what's going to be my secondary pick? Okay, well, I probably am going to want to have, I'm going to say Wong for this particular tournament, because he's also very fast. He can accomplish most of the same stuff that Zip does. He's got good card draw, so he can keep the resources coming a lot like Zip does, but he doesn't suffer from the same weaknesses. So if I end up in a bad matchup, I can swap him. The play style is going to play largely the same, but I'm going to have a better chance at not just getting murked. And then I'd say, okay, this cursed object pool looks really brutal. It has like Assassinate and Vendetta. It would be stupid of me not to at least have Ophelia in my bag, so that I can break her out depending on what the matchup ends up as. So I'm like, okay, there's my 3. I'm going to stick with it. I'm good to go. I plan on playing Zip 95% of the time, but I reserve the right to play Wong or Ophelia, given the matchup, the board state, the terrain, so on and so forth.
I think that's a lot of what ends up happening. A lot of what I do, I usually, like, Captain Con 2 years ago, I brought the kids, and I played the kids because they were really good. And like the changes I think I made were mostly just like changing out which double master I brought with them, because they were really stupidly good at that. And then I brought like Yedza, and the one like twice that I played Yedza, I hadn't got enough practice with her, so I didn't do very well. So I stuck with mostly the kids. And then the same thing happened at Nova. I played mostly Brew 2 because Brew 2 was really, really good before the nerfs. And then like I had a couple Ulix games that were fun and I won them, but like probably should have played Brew 2 like in those games. And then like I brought Ophelia because I like panicked against the Dita match, and that was a bad matchup for me. I should not have done that. So like usually it behooves me to have like 2 masters that I'm really 2 keywords that I'm really, really solid at. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll have a list, like kind of like Andre does to like perfect sort of like the list going in. I will do that for like 2 masters. I will have 2 lists that I feel like this list can take column A, this list can take column B, and I'll show up with those. Anything more than that, especially at like a tournament like Captain Con or Nova, where you're playing multiple events and you're playing 8 to 10 games of Malifaux in a week, and your brain just starts to melt after a little while. Like bringing too many more masters in that is too much. By the last day, I'm just like out of it and done. And you don't
You
want
end
to
up
be
making a
doing
bad
that
decision and saying, I'm going to play Zoraida this time. And then you get steamrolled and you get all pissed off at yourself. Like, why the fuck did I take Zoraida? What's wrong with me?
Yeah. So,
Absolutely.
That kind of thing.
or Nick Westbrook has you up drinking all night the night before, and you forget to take your medication, and so when you play him, you pitch a hissy fit, and that's
Yeah. Good times.
that's
the
what
best part of
happened to
that
me.
was watching you realize halfway through the day that the medication hadn't happened, and you're like, "Oh my god, damn it!"
yeah. No, I felt so bad. But so that's cool, because that's kind of like, I'm sure there are a lot of people that are getting into Tournament Malifaux that are going, they're asking themselves, how do I do this, or what do I do? Because, like, not only do we have new masters that just showed up in Madness Malifaux, we're still settling into titles, right? Like those titles bring in so many choices and so many thoughts. And it kind of sounds like to you guys what happened is exactly kind of what I thought would happen, is that people don't seem to be flexing like, oh, I'm going to play Dreamer 1 for this game and Dreamer 2 for this game. They seem to gravitate towards one title or the other. Have you found that kind of with you? Like you're interested in playing this title instead of jumping in? Or I know, Andre, you haven't really touched much of Maxine 2 because you felt pretty comfortable with 1, right?
Yeah, I think the issue for me, at least for that specific example, is Maxine 1 has more reliable, more consistent across the turn card manipulation, whereas Maxine 2, like, all of her power is in her own turn. For like, you'll get a calculate off, you'll get some cards back on her turn, but Maxine 1 lets everybody kind of dip their toe in the pool of getting cards back. So that was just like mechanically not something I ever ventured in. But I think as a counterexample, like if I thought that Nekima was still like podium competitive, I would probably also try to oscillate between Sword Maiden and Broodmother.
Okay.
Because I think they, as a good example of a master who provides good utility in either title, like one isn't significantly stronger than the other in terms of actually pulling a W. So while generally, yes, I'm only going to play one title or the other, and even with Nekima, that's true. If you see me put Nekima on the table, it's going to be Sword Maiden. But I don't even. I would. How do I want to put this? I would still consider someone who alternates between the two titles a one tricker, if that makes sense.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of there. It's interesting that you bring up Nekima, because I've been playing Nephilim a bit lately because I'm bringing Neverborn into Nova, and I'm finding that, like, play style wise, I very much gravitate towards Nekima 2. She kind of does all the little, like, janky schemy Rube Goldberg things that I enjoy, and while I will bring out Nekima 1 when the utmost killing is needed, I don't like her as much. Like, she's just not my style as much. So, like, in my case, like, if I'm going to play that style, then I will find a different master like Marcus that I enjoy the way he plays a lot more than I enjoy the way his keyword plays in that respect a lot more than actually, the better thing now, honestly, is I've been playing a lot of Castor 2. And to me, I enjoy Castor 2's play style more than Nekima's 1's play style, even though they kind of do similar things. The way their keyword works for me, I like a lot better.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah. Nathan, what about you as a faction player? Titles, what have they done to your brain?
Oh, I'm the opposite. I was just thinking about it. I've definitely Dash I'll run 1 and 2. Nelly, I'll run 1 and 2. I don't think I can claim it for Lady J because I've really run Lady J 1 once. Hoffman I'll run 1 and 2. So
Okay.
I will go back and forth across them for what I want from them in a game. There's always one that's the favorite and one that's the uh, almost more of a tech pick for the set of schemes and strats. But I will very much go between master and or title and non-title.
Cool.
Mhm.
Jesse, have you found the same thing?
It's it actually depends significantly on the master. I think that for me, there are a couple of masters that I play where I feel like the titles are close enough in parity to each other that I'm comfortable using either of them depending on the needs of the matchup, the terrain, so on and so forth. The ones that really stand out to me are Misaki. I think that both versions of her title are strong in their own right. There's a couple in Bayou. Ophelia is a good example. I would say Zip should be a good example, but unfortunately, I don't have enough experience with Zip 2 to really feel confident bringing him to the table.
Good. He's so good.
Yeah,
People
I
are
know.
sleeping on him so
I need to
hard.
get more reps in. Angler for sure. I think both versions of Angler are excellent in their own right. But there, unfortunately, there are a number of masters that I play very heavily that every single time I put the title version on the table, I just feel underwhelmed with it. Ma Tucket's probably the best example of that. I mean, Ma 1 is just raw power, man. I mean, she does what you need her to do. She hits, she buffs, she draws cards, she brings a ton of tech to the table. And I feel like every time I play Ma 2, while on paper she looks great, I just never seem to be able to get her to fire with the same level of consistency that I get Ma 1 to. So while I do feel like if I were to choose a one-trick master, there's a big benefit to picking one that you feel comfortable using either version of the title, or either title rather. I don't base all of my decisions on what I'm going to bring to a tournament table on, title 1 versus title 2.
Right.
If that makes sense. Nathan, I think, has
So
something.
it's funny you bring up Ma Tucket because I almost always expect 1 at the table. And at Captain Con, Jim Dyson swerved me.
Yeah.
We play together a lot. He lives around here, so I really expected Ma 1, and he took Ma 2 and really jammed me with her. I hadn't brought armor solves, and it tilted me so hard. He got me good. But it can be where if that second title is the one that is kind of known to be not the meta choice, if it has a skew or something like that, it can be really valuable.
Yeah, I think the dark horse potential with some of those second titles, it's worth note. That's kind of how I feel with Wong. Like, Wong 1 is just excellent. I seem to have figured out his crew. I can make them work. I can make them do what I need them to do. I don't feel like on his face Wong 2 is as strong as Wong 1, but he solves problems in a different enough way that there's a good use case for him. And if people are expecting Wong 1, Wong 2 can really kind of throw him for a loop.
Levy's probably that same way too.
Yeah, Levy is a great example for sure.
Knowing in Houston, Levy 1 definitely skewed how I built my list because I didn't want to drop like candy into Levy 1. Like, that's just not fun for anybody. So I definitely can see that. Like, there's a couple of them that are really, it's interesting, and that's probably a topic for another episode, like how have tiles
note of that right there. Put it on a sticky note right next to the computer. Oh yeah.
So Andre, going back to you, let's talk about what are the actual like pros and cons of specific pros and cons of running a single keyword. Specifically, like looking at like in the different places, playing it at your local events and playing it at big events, and what is your what do you feel like are your benefits and the disadvantages?
Well, certainly going to tournaments, and we're just going to start from like the logistical meta perspective and work our way in towards the game itself. Bringing one keyword is real light to pack. Oftentimes, I can bully or cajole one of my fellows into either just stuffing my crew in their bag or just using their crew to begin with. Stuff like that makes it to pack real light. If you have to take a whole keyword, you're having to like drag down there like a zombie with clubfoot in order to get all your models onto the table and then pick the 7 you're going to bring this game. Has never truly appealed to me. Also, I'm not a hobbyist, I'm a strategist. So the fewer models I have to paint, the better. I still have Nephilim models that haven't been painted. Beyond that, it's also a good thing to do if you want to try the game out. Like, if you only have to buy one keyword, you can get in for 100, 150 bucks, call it good, run that until you decide it's not fun anymore or not. And so the cost of entry is much, much lower. And then I think for me, in terms of like your place in a local meta, is you kind of become the thing that you're known for one tricking. Where it's like, oh, like my roommate and best friend Jordan, he has run the Crossroads 7 like the last like 4 tournaments. And so he is becoming known as the Crossroads 7 guy. And at the end of the day, there's something fun about that being kind of like the specific thing that you're known for. It's, you know, it's like being a gym leader, right? Like at the end of the day, like they're going to come in, you're the grass type gym leader. And if on some way you can kind of be a gatekeeper where it's like, if you can't beat the Crossroads 7, you're going to have a hard time getting to podium because you know that dude's in the meta. And so if you catch that game, you just lose.
Yeah.
And then kind of the wider understanding of one tricking is if you can get to a tournament where you're not well known, which I am now doomed, but like the being able to dark horse a one trick means that you're being able to demonstrate a lot more mastery on a crew than people might expect. From like the average bear on Maxine versus my Maxine and what the level difference there is. If you don't have people that haven't spent like dozens of sleepless nights going, how do I beat that guy, to just have to like blind check into me, that's real rough at a large tournament. So I think one tricking offers a lot of value from just like outside the game perspective. And the same thing for me, like zooming in a bit, getting to just before a game starts. I noticed that before I started saying that I was a one tricker and trying to do that exclusively, that I would psych myself out at crew select. Where it's like, oh, dude, I'm pretty sure this guy is going to bring this. Every Yanlo player I've ever seen brings that. He's going to bring it. I got to bring all this armor pen. And then he puts like 2 Gakudo down onto the table. He's never seen a Kamainu in his life. And you're like, I'm an idiot. I can't believe I just psyched myself into picking all these suboptimal things. Whereas if you're one tricking, you're like, I literally don't care what my opponent's bringing. I know what my crew is. Brings a lot of the stress down. Like I would rather kick myself for decisions I made during the game than for decisions I made before the game. And I think that ends up being a lower stress environment for one trickers overall, just because there's less of the game to have to think about. And it's also much, much easier. The last thing I would say that it's a big advantage for one tricking is once you have cemented your foothold into the game from one specific keyword, you can now begin to understand other keywords. It's like learning an instrument, right? Like once I've mastered the piano, it becomes much, much easier, even though they're pretty different instruments, to be able to learn the guitar because I already know how to read sheet music and all that stuff. And it's the same basic thing applies to crew build and list building once you've started one tricking, where it's like, well, I know when I play Nakima, I really, really want models that can get down the board and score this scheme doing this. And so I'm going to look for that when I start building other crews. And it provides a good leap off, a good diving board off which to dive into new keywords now that you have an understanding based on the first keywords that you play.
And I mean, yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense because you're like you said, you've kind of become that rock that everybody has to like, fight against. And I think that there's a really interesting conversation to be had, like right there, about a lot of people in Malifaux, especially in the like higher meta levels, want to talk about like how do we beat such a matchup. Like you'll hear like, oh well, if they bring Nekima, then I can't win, right? Like my faction loses this. I can't win to this. And I feel like a lot of what you're saying is that with enough knowledge, you reduce that gap significantly. Do you feel like there's a point where you're just like you're able to reduce it completely, or do you feel like there's still those games where you're like, man, Maxine really just does not want to see this, and this is going to be a hard game?
There are still matchups that can be very, very rough. I think, and this is always something that I've loved about Malifaux in comparison to other games, though, is that like the skill differential between the players is usually the most deciding factor in a game, because I can have like, if I introduce, my mom to Malifaux tomorrow and she picks up, Damien before the nerfs or whatever, like odds are I'm still probably going to be able to beat her in the first 10 games, despite the fact that Damien is really, really dumb before the nerfs. But like the, um, the, the bad matchups, especially when you're one tricking, become a lot more palatable for the one tricker overall, because when you are the bad matchup, it's not necessarily something you're used to, right? Because if you're a Terra player and the regular XO has the whole faction player says, "Oh, well, I'm not going to play Maxine because she has BB and Calypso as one of her key pieces, and I can't play that into a potential berry crew. I'm just never going to run Maxine into Terra or whatever." Um, as the Terra player, you might not often see that matchup at all because everyone just assumes it's a bad matchup and you don't play it. But if you're one tricking, you're like, okay, I've had to play this matchup half a dozen times. I have so much more experience to bring to the table in order to try and outplay my opponent, that it comes back to that skills gap that I mentioned, where I have a much higher chance of being able to beat you on my understanding and experience of the matchup that, you might not have, because everyone practices for their bad matchup, but like no one like, hey man, can you get this thing in where I hard counter you because I need to learn how to stomp you out? Like no one has that practice run per se. So the getting countered, I would say, is be less afraid of it than you think it should matter, especially for a Malifaux game.
I run into that a lot playing Nightmare, because like you hear well, you can't play Terra, or you can't play Lady J. You can't play into those because they have that anti-berry tech, and kind of like with what I was talking about in the Students of Conflict episode. Guys, everybody, go listen to Students Conflict episode, where I was talking about playing Dreamer into Cursed Objects, because we don't play Summoners into Cursed Objects, except that I kind of like, by playing it, found a way around it. Like being able to find those spots in the game where you can go, no, this isn't so bad. Our last episode that we had was all about counter tech and bringing counter tech. And, one of the things we talked about is being careful about bringing too much counter tech, or being worried too much about counter tech. So Nathan, as a faction player, what is your thoughts on this bad matchups or things like that? Do you find your way to force through the crews that you like, or do you try to pick for what's best?
I usually try to force through it. Interestingly enough, I think there are certain masters that I find to be bad faction matchups, where like if I'm not specifically thinking about them, I'm just like, if I see, like, for a while it was Dreamer. I don't know after the nerf, but Dreamer and Levy both were ones that, like, if I saw them on the table, I was just ready to give up. I was not working, and I didn't have quite consistent enough play against them to learn the matchup. I saw them just enough to make them really painful, and I don't know if I'd been playing one master and focusing on one master, if that would have been something that would have come to me. I would have started to understand it more, but especially because I don't tend to counter tech very much, sometimes there's just a couple of matchups that really just, ooh, I hate to see them, and I go into the game not feeling very good about them. I think that's just a fact from playing whole faction that kind of leaves me in that mood.
Jesse, anything?
Yeah, I definitely have those too. If I one of the my white whale, so to speak, is Von Stuck. I fucking hate seeing Von Stuck on the other side of the table.
Yeah.
Oh, God, that dude's the total package.
He's got a lot going on.
I've walked away from games against him just being like, I think he draws more cards than me, hits harder than me, and is faster than me. I don't know what to do.
And is more survivable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and more survivable. Yes.
It's wild that Von Stuck that there's not a one trick Von Stuck player out there. Like, he's so good. He can
I think that's what Andre was saying. It's you can't do that with someone that's boring, or you'll lose your mind.
It is not an exciting crew to play. That is very true. It is not really an exciting crew to play. But Andre, so what are the cons of playing a one trick?
I think the most notable cons. So let me put it to you this way: the con that I have to run into most often is, while it is fun to be known for playing one thing in particular, it begins to be a problem when people are like, "Oh, cool! I'm going to handcraft this list and pair it with this Chianti that I'm going to eat your crew by disassembling because I know model by model what you're bringing." It ends up becoming a problem because you're, of course, at least by crew build, predictable. So if they're like, man, I really need to be able to move your intrepid emissary away from your machinist so I can kill it, like, that's a fairly specific understanding of how a crew is going to work. To then prepare for that and then bring and execute on that plan is not something that most players have to deal with. I, of course, have put my hand further up the broom and am now expecting people to counterpick me based on this. But the basic premise is, like, you're going to have to deal with being countered, especially at local tournaments, right? Like, if it's the same, 10 to 16 people showing up and playing games month after month or whatever, odds are they're going to be like, man, I am so tired of that friggin' intrepid emissary. How do I deal with that thing? People will sit down and try to figure out how to beat it, and they'll eventually solve for it and beat it. It happened to Nakima eventually, back in GG0. And then I would say, beyond people knowing what you're bringing being a problem, I would also say that, like, there's just some matchups depending on what you're one tricking, because I don't think you have to one trick a whole package, but that will be the difference between whether or not you're a podium player or a gatekeeper. But if you're one tricking something and it has a bad matchup and you can't, like, skill your way out of it, that just sucks so bad. To be like, all right, cool, it's Jackdaw, I have no ruthless tech, I'm roasted. And there are some crews that just have those kinds of matchups depending on what you pick in order to one trick. And so I think, as with most other competitive games, there's definitely, when you're building your crews out for one tricking, you're like, all right, cool, there are some matchups that I'm just going to take the L on, and you have to be either okay with that or somehow figure out, like, a way to around that, or just hope that it doesn't come up, which is also has been an option. I know that one less one tricking, but more like players themselves, where it's like, I can make a podium if I don't catch Travis this round. Like, being able to dodge specific crews and players is sometimes just what you have to hope for as one tricker, which, competitively hoping isn't exactly a huge selling point. So I think that's a fairly poignant con for a lot of people. And then I think the one that I hear the most, because there's one of our locals, Rob Perry, he can't stand the idea of one tricking because it bores him so quickly. So, like, if you don't find the idea of figuring out how to play a crew to the nth degree exciting, if you're not an iterator kind of player, if you're an innovator, one tricking sucks. And I can certainly see how people get bored of playing the same crew over and over and over again. Thankfully, I'm a very content, easy to please man, so for the most part, that's not a problem for me. But I can certainly see that for other people, if they want to, mix it up and get something new, then, especially in the same tournament, then I can see that being a problem. But I change keywords every so often that I'm one tricking. But
and some of us are just like have ADHD squirrel brain, so every time a new model comes out, I mean, I just spent $150 on Castor models. So,
bro, I'm gonna start one tricking Jedsta. Have you seen that sick new box? Oh,
here's my issue with that though. The Seeker models already look so good. I'm a little upset that they replaced a keyword that looks really good with the Nightmare box that also looks really good. I kind of wish they had, like, that was like Reva or something where I'm not as in love with the keyword models. Because if that was a Reva box, I'd have bought it hands down because I don't have Reva yet.
Can you imagine telling
I think
Reva players that they don't have to assemble land pads? You can't do it.
In a heartbeat. They would
have to earn it.
Yeah.
But no, the thing for me is, like, at least you didn't get, like, fish peopled, right? Like, I hated that box. Dude.
I know you did.
I hated that box. They did my girl so dirty. But yeah, so at least they're both sick, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I would say, just to kind of build on some of the single word, pros and cons before we move on. There's a couple of things that I think are really important to mention, and this is going to be specifically for either new players that are getting into the game or players that are getting into a new faction. And Andre kind of talked about this a little bit before, but it is much, much easier to get into the game or into a new faction if you can decide on a keyword and then commit to a certain number of games with that keyword. This is going to kind of come into the discussion when we talk about playing a faction as well, but what it really comes down to is that 5 games with a master is leagues better than 1 game apiece with 5 different masters. You're going to have a very difficult time not only learning the mechanics of the keyword, but you're also going to have a tough time getting a handle on what the resource requirements are. What does your opening hand need to look like? How do you do your unpacks? You're just going to be doing a lot of stuff by sort of like guesswork, and probably not really feeling very good about yourself at the end of the game, almost regardless of how the game plays out. More than likely, unless it's just a ridiculously over the curve master or you're playing against somebody who is maybe a little newer, you're probably going to lose those first couple of games that you play with a new crew because you're going to be doing a lot of learning. And if you lose all of those first 5 or 10 games because you can't kind of refine what you're actually going to be playing down to a single keyword or two, you're probably going to end up getting frustrated. And a lot of times that's why people end up stopping playing Malifaux or really any game. I had one guy who was in our local meta who is a very competitive 40k player. Like, he is always top podium. He researches the crap out of his crew, out of his armies. He spends a lot of time and a lot of money putting together the best, net list army of the day. And he decided to get into Neverborn. He picked up Nekema, really, really liked her. He also picked up Euripides, really liked him. And he picked up Pandora. And he basically played about 10 to 12 games, jumping back and forth between all 3 of these masters, didn't win a single one of his games, got frustrated and left because he was used to winning all the time in 40k. And when he realized not only can you not win all the time in 40k in Malifaux just by sheer weight of rules, but also you really need to know how your crew works. You can't play Neverborn and expect Neverborn to play the same way with a couple of little tweaks based on the keyword that you're taking. Playing a keyword is basically akin to playing an army in 40k. They all function differently. They all have different styles of play, different resource requirements, so on and so forth. So, what I tell people is if they're deciding to focus on a single keyword, they're really going to be at a great advantage after they get maybe in that 5 to 10 game range, because like Andre said, you're going to look at your opening hand and you're going to say, okay, I'm playing Misaki. What do I need to make my crew work on turn 1? Do I need to stone for cards? Do I need to do anything janky to draw cards in the turn to get the stuff I need? I know that I need a 5 mask for a Toto so that he can do the Storm is Coming and get a leap. I need a 7 for my Torakage so that it can do a Ninja Vanish. Very important. I'm going to probably want to have an 8 of any suit for Misaki so that I can do an Oyobone's Command. If I'm playing Minako Rei, I'm probably going to want, ideally, 2 different 10 plus cards so that I can get some summons off on turn 1. And unless you've got a couple of reps in, at least 5, but a couple of reps in with a crew, you're going to have no idea what you need when you look at that opening hand. You're going to make mistakes when you unpack. You're going to end up out of range of pulses and auras, and it's just not really going to be a great game for you. Mm-hmm. But when you get those reps in and it clicks, man, does it feel good. Oh, it's like butter. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So, that I think is a big benefit of doing single keyword for a new player. We'll just term it as a new player to either the game or a faction, and a good reason to, maybe steer away from getting into multiple different keywords sort of at the same time. We also talked a little bit about the whole mental bandwidth thing. I do think that there's a great benefit to that, especially at a tournament table. You can psych out your opponent and you can have your tournament tray out with probably 3 different keywords on it. And they're looking at your tournament tray saying, okay, I see Yan Lo, I see Misaki, I see Yoko. I probably think he's going to play Yoko this turn. What do I do if he plays Yoko? But what if he plays Yan Lo? I need to have some armor penetration, like blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, you're just sitting there. You already have your crew selected. Your cards are down on the table. You maybe made one little tweak after they declared their master on some sort of a tech pick, but like you're just sitting there looking at the table. You're saying, okay, well, here's some firing lanes. Here's how I'm going to deploy if I get stuck on this deployment edge. You're already like 5 steps ahead of your opponent in terms of the pregame process. And it really, I think, puts you at a great advantage, especially once you start getting into top tables at a big event. If you already know exactly what you're playing and your opponent is trying to figure it out, because they're spending a lot more mental bandwidth than you are, which frees up your resources to play a better game.
Well, and important to notice as more tournaments start moving into using clocks. I know in Houston, you get a kind of free 15 minutes of setup, really, before you jump into the clocks. If you're still setting up in those 15 minutes, if you're still, like that's time off. That if you're into clock phase and you're still setting up, that's a problem. Like that's, you want to be able to get in and get into the game and get as much of that game in as you can before the clocks start working, so that you can, have that extra time. And so, yeah, absolutely. I can see that sort of like, being able, and the one time, like really, the closest game I think Andre and I have ever had was when Andre was first learning how to play McCabe. And it was like I had a list that I knew really well. He was just running, starting McCabe, and I was like, oh yeah, this is working. And then like 2 months later, Andre and I still playing McCabe, and I was like, oh, this is wow. I'm getting my butt kicked here.
I figured this one out, huh?
Yeah, like, oh, okay. So maybe McCabe's better than I thought. Because when you first came, you're like, I'm going to play McCabe. I'm like, oh, okay. Sure.
Yeah, there's a learning curve on that one.
Yeah. So, Nathan, when you're looking at your playing for the faction, what are the pros and cons that you see of being a faction player?
So I do think I want to reiterate what Jesse said about getting those reps of like consistently with one master and going to the next, especially when you're first getting into playing a whole faction. Like I played 10 with each master, and then when titles hit, I played 10 with each titles. The titles were a little more scattered because I was very excited, but generally I'm trying to play 10 in a row with each of them, because you do have to learn those things, and you can't get away with not doing that just because you're playing a faction. It's not like that. I think it makes it very hard to predict what I'm going to bring though into a game, because especially right now, right after the erratas, I don't think anyone can say what the guild meta is. Like they can make a couple guesses, they can guess on a couple things, but there's a lot of options out there, and it could be a lot of different directions. So it's going to be hard to predict me based on that. I think that if you play the same faction enough, you can get pretty good mastery of what you do, but you'll also, the risk is, and this is a disadvantage, I think you risk trying to play all the masters a little more samey than you should. Almost every master, and it's great for GG3, I think, but I'm going to be in trouble if it changes. Right now, I could play largely fighting for the middle, and I'm not even having to commit myself into the middle. I can do it largely from my deployment zone in this current GG, and that's great for guild in general. But there's that might not be true in a lot of factions. I think but I really like going to a tournament and being like, of course I'm playing guild. I don't have to figure it out. I was thinking the other, like when you were talking, Maeve, about playing a lot of factions, having to think about what faction to play going into a thing. I was like, oh, I'm stressed. Like that's that's a lot just to think about right there. At least I can say I'm playing guild and then pick from masters. Um, but I think like at least in my meta, I'm unusual for that. Most people play more than one faction that I've seen. They
Yeah.
aren't playing every master in a faction, but they are playing multiple factions.
Weird just keeps making pretty models. It's hard not to want to buy them.
See, if you're bad at painting, it solves that. It really like it's. I don't get drawn in by pretty bottles because I know I'm not going to do them justice, which is really nice. I have a good time painting, but it's not going to be like I have just as much fun painting my little cowboys. So that isn't really a different setup for me. Um, I did want to ask, Maeve, you said you played Nick at Nova, right?
Uh-huh.
You knew Nick was going Perdita all day.
Yeah.
Did that change how you picked for that game? And you mentioned that like you had taken something that didn't work out. Do you think it
Yeah.
hurt you knowing that he was soloing that?
Yeah, a little bit because first of all, I hadn't won a game against Perdita 2 yet, so I was a little frustrated by knowing that that was going to be a particularly annoying matchup as it is. And I had already thought about like, well, what will I bring if I got this Perdita matchup? And I think that the Ophelia matchup versus a Perdita 2 matchup is a good matchup. The problem was what I didn't take into account there was the board. The board was very with Perdita being able to get all of her guns to ignore every goddamn thing, and Ophelia not being able to do that. My guys had to come out of hiding to shoot, and his guys did not. And that is what cost me the game. If I had looked at the board correctly and seen the way this was going, I would have done something like probably Brew or, I mean, Ulix is a tough matchup there because she turns off healing, and Ulix really, really needs to heal. And Brew also kind of likes healing, but I feel like the Brew crew would have gotten into her a lot quicker with a lot more stamina and would have been able to do those little shuffles around all of the terrain. And that would have been a better pick for me. But I got so caught up in that, like, oh, Perdita beats, or Ophelia stands a chance against Perdita because, you know, guns are guns, that I completely overlooked the other factors of the game, such as the pool and the board. And the board was the board was absolutely the big. There were like two huge forests that just like completely changed how the board went. And yeah, that's what cost me the game. And by the time I realized it, like I realized midway through turn one, the game was unwinnable for me. And that's a rough situation to be in. Like on turn one going, I am playing 3 points down right now is so hard.
So one more disadvantage I can think of about playing full faction. I've noticed this at Nova. The physical act of spending time finding models in my bag. After a while, really became something that was like I was like grinding my teeth as I did it. It was just, even though I, for the most part, knew which master I wanted to play into each schemes and strats, so I could use the whole break to do it. That was just more mental tax on days that I probably couldn't afford mental tax.
That's
and
fair.
That matters.
Especially Nova, where we're running 10 games total throughout the weekend, right? By that last day, you're just like, oh my God. Yeah, I think that's really important to say is that like you do need to, even if you play a faction, I think if you're going to your local game, just go play whatever you want to play. If you're going to a local tournament, right, a 3-round tournament where you're just having fun, play what you want to play. If you're heading to one of these big tournaments and you're having to pack, you know, we've been talking all week about how the Nova GT has an Iron Scorpius prize. And I've been like racking my brain over do I want to try to bring 5 factions or 5 keywords of Neverborn? And the answer is no, because Neverborn has the chonkiest goddamn models in the game, and there's no way to fit that entire faction into one box. It's just not possible. Between, like, I play Euripides, and Euripides is all big asses,
That's
right?
huge chonkers. Yep.
Nephilim has a lot of big asses,
Yep.
right?
God bless her.
Dreamer is tied with Titania for having the chonkiest fucking model in the game between Lord Chompy Bits and the Malosaurus Rex, right? And after all that, I'm just like, I don't have room to bring this. I'm traveling 9 hours on a train, and you also don't want to have like a huge bag sitting with you at the table, because oftentimes in those convention tournaments you don't have a lot of room to put all of your stuff. So if you show up with a giant A case, right, like, people are going to be very annoyed at you by you taking up so much space. And so I really,
people on a plane,
right, or being on a plane, like, good God, like, yeah. So I really, when I went to Houston, I was like, I'm not flying with these models. Doug, bring me your models. And he did, and I won with him, and it was great. And I was really disappointed because my Dreamer crew looks fantastic, and I was wanting to show it off, but I wasn't gonna like drag that on and pay extra for a plane, like extra bags on a plane or whatever. But also, like you said, when you're playing to your faction, that mental space of like being able to figure out ahead of time what you want to bring, what's going to be good for you, and just because you do play the whole faction doesn't mean you have to play the whole faction this time. I think that's very important. It's a very important thing to like parse out. Like, just because you can bring every single faction doesn't mean you have to. And for me, definitely that mental load is there to be like, nah, I'm I'll play 2, maybe 3.
Yeah, and I think that this is maybe veering off a little bit. Well, it's not really off topic, but it's veering off a little bit. To Nathan's point before, there are some factions that can sort of play multiple keywords while still maintaining several models in like a common core crew. Guild are a good example of this. They've got some great All-Stars models that can really fit into multiple different keywords. Thunders are another great example. There are some factions that really struggle with that. I mean, Neverborn is one that until recently, I mean, there are some common models that are pretty strong, but they don't really have as many choices, at least from my perspective, of very strong models that can fit into pretty much any keyword. The new Half-Bloods, I think, sort of fill a little bit of that gap. You can kind of take those into a lot of different places, but
well, and trying to work with those common core crews can often set you in the sights of a nerf bat anyway, because one of the bases for whether or not they nerf a model is, are we seeing a lot of play of this model regardless of context? And so, if you're a huge Serena Bowman stan, and then they start cutting down her power, like, that kind of sucks. So I think a lot of the times what I choose to play is centered around, will they nerf this, or do I want to get them to nerf this? And I think that is a consideration of trying to make like an all versatiles reliant faction instead of a keyword by keyword.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that it's good that, again, maybe slightly off of the topic at hand, but we did see a little bit of that with Arcanists recently. It was becoming very obvious that the majority of Arcanist crews were going to start including multiple Watchmen models, sometimes even up to 4. They might take 2 Gearlings and then both of the other models from the box, which is kind of an obvious problem when you have models that can fit into literally any of their keywords equally well.
I mean, the
I'm
Karis
happy to
list
see
and
that
the
there was an
Raspy
adjustment
list.
made. Say again?
Yeah, the Karis list and the Raspy list were bringing 3 models every time.
Yeah.
Because
who
doesn't want double focus double focus and going last guaranteed for both of those masters.
Right. Right. So I'm happy to see that we saw a pretty quick adjustment to those models. Um, I feel like Weird has done a pretty good job overall at adjusting some of those faction all-star models as time has gone on. I mean, we saw that with Thunders a while ago when all the rage was taking, double trained ninja samurai and from the shadowsing and blowing the hell out of your opponent with, Fuhatsu as your second string shooter. Oh boy. Yeah, thankfully we're not seeing stupid stuff like those lists with the double samurai and Fuhatsu plus the master of choice just to kind of add some flavor to the stew.
As a Bayou player, I hated that. Bayou had no answer for double samurai. No answer.
Yeah, it's bad news.
So, I love seeing bans to solve some of that too. Like, I know it doesn't help with the Fuhatsu double samurai, but like it really did for Guild. It means that I start, especially because I tend to pre-plan my lists. I had to plan for, okay, might not have Lone Marshal, but might not have a lawyer, might not have different options, and had to be ready for that. And that was honestly my preferred way of playing. I'd much prefer have that.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, those limited formats are always fun. They're always good exercises to be like, okay, so what do I do when I have this restriction? Like how do I play this when I have this? And I like those concepts a lot.
I liked the bands format because it provided an opportunity to yet still continue to not have to think about the pregame, at least from a list building perspective. But at the same time, it did still open up the opportunity to be like, all right, what do I really not want to see on the table right now? Which did have, unfortunately, on some level, reintroduce me to having to think about the game before the game.
Yeah, especially good for some of those one-trick lists. Like, good example would be like if I decided I was going to one-trick Misaki and I played into an Outcast player, I could literally just say, oh, well, clearly I'm going to ban Obliteration because that's the only thing I really have to worry about if they didn't play Tara.
Right.
So, yeah. No. The whole thing.
So let's dig a little bit deeper into sort of advanced like meta knowledge a little bit and kind of talk about where the game is right now and playing faction versus one tricking, and kind of like how you guys feel as the game's progressing about your specific play styles. I know for me, one of the things I'm seeing is like, especially with titles, playing a single keyword feels like, or just buying like, oh, I just want to buy this keyword from this faction. I just want to buy this keyword from this faction. And maybe this tournament I'll play this keyword. Maybe this tournament I'll play this keyword. Feels a lot more viable now that we have titles. And to some degree, for me at least, playing the whole faction feels a little exhausting these days because there are just so many models. Even in just one keyword, sometimes there are so many models. What do you guys think about that?
Well, it certainly has affected, like you said, playing a whole keyword is exhausting. I absolutely agree. I think even though I do play the whole faction, in my local games, I'm playing 3 or 4 at any given time. I'm rarely, I hadn't picked up Perdita for months. I played it for one local tournament just to see what all the fuss was about, see if it was still where I thought it was, and then left her alone. Like it just wasn't something I wanted to do, and the factions are big enough now that if you're not doing it concerted, I'm going to play 10 of each. It's almost going to happen naturally. You can't, you're just not going to play everything consistently. So I know I haven't, but I also think it means that knowledge checkpoints are a much bigger risk at tournaments than you'd have otherwise.
Yeah, and this is maybe kind of a stupid parallel to make, but there's this theory in psychology called Dunbar's theory, which basically says that you can only maintain about 150 personal connections in your life. It's very difficult for you to know on any significant level more than that number of people. I think that the same thing kind of holds true with regards to Malifaux models. you really only have enough space in your brain to store the details for a finite number of models. And while I say that I might play the Bayou faction, I'm very much the same way as Nathan. I realistically, I'm really only playing 4 keywords out of the faction at a time. And I might go through a phase where I'm like, okay, I've played enough Ophelia. I'm going to sideline her for a while. I'm going to start hitting Ulix really hard. And I'm going to really learn that crew so I can make it a part of my rotation. And trying to kind of rotate in and out models even within a faction, I think is a very real thing. I really can't think of anybody that I've ever played against that I feel has a true mastery of every single keyword in their faction. Everybody's got their strengths. Everybody's got their favorites. Even if somebody says that they're playing an entire faction, it is so hard to get a sufficient number of games in to get that true level of mastery with every single master. I mean, if I said I'm going to play nothing but Bayou and I'm going to try and make sure that I get X number of games in with every single one of these masters over whatever time frame I choose, I could easily play for a year and a half, playing nothing but Bayou. And I probably would still feel like I could get more games in with a couple of specific masters, especially once you take titles into account, because some of the titles play so drastically differently than their regular or their original versions that it's really almost like learning an entirely new crew.
And play style comes into play, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there are just certain crews that are not going to gel with you, even if they are statistically better, right? Like Witness was big. Witness was really strong. I tried it a little bit. I played it in the beta testing. It just wasn't my thing. It was a little too mathy, a little too crunchy. I just wasn't interested in it. And so, despite the fact that it was objectively the best keyword in the game, like it wasn't what I was gravitating
Mm-hmm.
towards. So, if you had, tied me down and said you must play Arcanists, I wouldn't have picked Damien. Like I would have gone to somebody else, Marcus or Karis or someone that I thought was more interesting. Raspy, I played like 10 or 12 games of Raspy right after the Arcanist starter box came out because it seemed really cool. So playstyle
Cool. I see what you did there.
playstyle does make a huge difference in sort of where you gravitate towards your faction. I know Nathan's girl is Sonya. He's tried very, 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 very hard to make Sonya like his most relevant master, and he's really good with Sonya too. I don't think in the games we've played, I've done very well against your Sonya lists. Whereas like I've played other people and just beaten the brakes off of Sonya. So, play style does matter.
I think there's also like I was thinking about what Jesse said about the personal connections and the limitations there and the similar things with masters. I don't know about you all, but I keep spending reps and brain power on Lucius 1. And I really need to stop if I really were trying to use what I had effectively. But I can't stop, won't stop. It's just happening.
Lucius 1, man. Yeah, that's some level of masochism right there.
How many times since the nerf have I looked at Sommer's cards and gone, I can make this work, and then I play it and I'm like, I can't make it work. I can't make it work.
It's funny because that's one that you can watch happening in real time on a regular basis on certain Discords. Someone try to talk themselves into it. They're like, well, that could be pretty, especially this summer too. Maybe I can help out. And
yeah,
it always ends in heartbreak.
It always ends in heartbreak, but we're getting a rework soon, according to our friends at Weird. So fingers crossed it'll be here before Christmas.
That'd be great.
So is that what I need to do? I need to figure out how to play Lucius 1. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think you'd love it. It's better than it's like I will win more games with Lucius 1 than I should. But not more than I'm going to win with other guild masters.
I mean,
it's kind of between that right now.
Nathan has shocked me with how many models he has killed with Hidden Sniper. I'll put it that way. Hidden Sniper does a surprising amount of damage. I think because it's just so hard to play around. You know,
Mhm.
you can shoot from any model on the board, and Lucius on his turn can move something up with a bonus action and then double focus fire twice on you, and you're like, oh, well, that was cool. I thought that, like the last game we played,
Mm-hmm.
I had an Insidious Madness. He was up against a large um, blocking terrain. There was a whole big wall of height 3 blocking terrain, and I was like, he's never going to see my guy. And then, like, the scribe just scoots up around the corner, and then it's dead. I'm like, oh, well, that's cool.
So Lucius has like a couple things that are really great learning tools too. You're going to learn exactly the strengths and limitations of negative flip defenses, of getting
Mm.
positive flips and focus on your own attacks, when that's going to pay off, when that's going to still fail you. The lawyers in particular, if you discard a 7 for a lawyer's defense to use intimidating authority, your opponent will outflip your stat 4 defense, and it's not every time, but it's enough. It's like, I think that was actually when we played our last Lucius game.
Mhm.
That came up too because I was attacking Dreamer and knowing exactly, yes, you have Serene, but it doesn't always pay off. And knowing to lean into that is,
No.
I think, really valuable. So I think that's the other thing with playing full faction. There are masters that will teach you lessons that will be helpful with other masters in ways that you can't really predict.
Andre?
I guess I wanted to kind of dive into the idea of what like truly playing a faction actually means in practical terms versus kind of how we've been talking about it as an ideal. And that is to say, like when I say I'm playing Neverborn as a faction, I don't think that they have every single version of every single master at their disposal per se. I think at what ends up being a faction player is they picked what they think to be the three best things of that faction and bringing it to bear. I think because I don't think I'm ever gonna have to spend quality time wondering if Jesse's gonna bring Brew One into a matchup, right? Like that's just probably not happening.
Okay. Okay.
I'm so mad. I missed at last Nova my opportunity to bring Brew 1 as a second master into Moser's Brew 2 crew, and I didn't. And it would have been so good because it would have Brew 1 just completely would have derailed his whole crew, and I'm still mad that I did not take that opportunity to do that.
Tragic. Yeah, but like for the most part, right? Like you're like there are certain crews that like for a given matchup, like you just know it's going to happen. Like if guild, for the most part, like 80% of the time, if you're fighting, guard the stash guild, you're probably going to see like a Hoffman or maybe a guard. And like so, like having to plan for the rest of that isn't really an issue because they're bringing their best parts of the faction to bear for a given strategy. So I think because there's been a lot of discussion of like, well, I don't actually play the whole faction. I just play the 3 or 4 best things in my faction for a given selection of pools. And I think if we're being as true to it as we can, I think that is probably what actually defines faction play.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
I
I
would
think
say
the
everything
thing is
but not.
being able to reach into.
Say again, Nathan. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, I would say everything but not best. So, like, I know for me, I might be bringing 3 masters. They might not be the best 3. Like,
Yeah.
It might be just what tickled my fancy at the time. It was, and Nellie's a perfect example of. I'll put Nellie on the table way more than I should. I think she's half my tournament losses in the last year and a half, but she's also put some really great games for me, and she's one that I kind of feel like the people I've lost to are all people that I expect to lose to anyway. So I'm not sure. It might be that I tend to take her into people that I think are strong, but might be thrown off by a different style of play.
Mm-hmm.
And that whether that's a mistake or not, I'm not sure. But that's definitely like I didn't take Perdita to a Captain Con. She hadn't been nerfed yet. She was there. Toll was around. I would have had to proxy it, but Toll was around. I was running Watson in a couple crews, especially Nelly 2, which I'm really sad that I don't think I'm going to be doing now. But really, it's not always the strongest when you're playing full faction. I think there's a mentality that's different at the level. I think Jesse described this on that he was playing, that he plays at, that I play at. I think we tend to land around the same mid-table realm. And I don't know if I thought I had a strong podium chance at Nova, if it would change what I was taking or not. But it certainly at this stage, I will take things. I'm like, I will have more fun if I do this at Nova than if I take the thing that I think is one of the top 3.
So you're like playing for fun? What is that like? I don't.
Oh no! I'm the I'm the saltiest, angriest player you've ever met. So
oh my gosh!
Once I do it, I'm furious. I'm like mad at myself. But yeah, in the meantime, I'm playing Lucius 1 and then being mad that Lucius 1 isn't where I wanted him to be in the meta.
Right.
Why hasn't Guild buffed this yet? And I'm like trying to not give my opponent a bad time. So
I will say that the worst times usually that I end up having, and the worst games I usually end up having in a tournament, is when I last minute say, okay, I'm just going to do this. And that was when I played Magic on, Pro Tour circuit for quite a while. And any time that I would absolutely go on a losing binge is when, like, 2 days before the tournament, I'm like, I'm going to play this deck that I just built and it's going to be great. And I hadn't tested it. I hadn't done anything. I just had this idea and I was like, I'm going to run this like a crazy person. And then, like, I'm 5 rounds in and I haven't won but like one game. And I'm like, oh, well, this was a stupid idea. I should have played the deck that I had spent much time on and practiced on. And we had a team of 8 people that would play games against each other and just play constantly to kind of like grind out what was our best decks. And I would ignore all of that wisdom that we had put weeks and weeks and weeks into and just bring whatever. And I've done the same thing in Malifaux multiple times where I'm just like, last minute, I'm going to drop this thing because I had this idea and I thought it'd be cute. And it's not cute enough to play at a big tournament. Like, what am I doing? Like,
are you last minuting the meta leader or are you last minuting the jank?
Usually the jank.
Okay.
It's usually some janky bullshit because you know how much I love janky bullshit.
Yes.
And every once in a while it works out. Like the first time I dropped the before the Sparks nerf, the first time I dropped the Ma Tucket list with Alphons and test subjects and was just like, that was in an online tournament and Owen was like, what the actual fuck is this list? Like, I hate everything about this. And that just was one of those where, like, obviously the jank was really strong, so it worked in my favor. But
well, and oftentimes those moments where you make like a last minute, like dumb decision to do a completely different thing than what you've been planning for weeks ends up just having like great stories come out of it, like immediately. Like, I think my favorite moment for one of those moments recently was in the last year. I think I showed up to a tournament and I was like, you know what? I want to play something different. Hey, Clay, do you have your pigs with you? And he's like, yeah, sure. So I just put Ulix 1 on the table 3 times and I cleaned house with him. But I was like, oh my gosh, this guy has so much sauce. What's going on? And then like Bayou players apparently everywhere were like, what are you doing, bro? That guy sucks.
That was me when you won with Sonya, so I understand.
Oh,
Nathan,
man, yeah.
Well, so Nathan was talking about masters that make you learn from playing them. Ulix is one of those.
Yeah.
If you want to learn how to manage your hand, Ulix is a perfect master for it because he will stress every card in your hand is important. And I do really love like masters like that, like Ulix for that. Like, when you're learning your faction and everything, like he is hands down. If somebody wants to be like, I need to learn how to manage my hand better, take these pigs, play 10 games with these pigs. You will learn the value of every card in your hand. We need to get that. We have a friend, Nathan, that we need to give the pigs to.
No. We've given him hand management masters. He just powers through and hates it the whole time. Like it doesn't work.
Why do I keep losing? I have no cards in my hand. I don't understand.
Yeah.
Well, when you spend them all in your first activation and you don't have any card draw,
Yeah.
It's
there's a
difficult.
lot of heart of the cards. That's when you, as a Bayou player, just say, well, I guess I just have to take the lucky effigy into every crew because
Yep.
I don't know how to manage my resources.
I
Bro,
did
that thing
that
is so
in the game Nathan and I
That thing is
played
so
the other
good.
week with Lucy versus Dreamer. I had the new Angel Eyes in it, and I was like, there are models in range that Angel Eyes can kill. This is also going to cost me 2 to 3 cards to do it. 2 to 3 decent cards to do it. And I was like, those moments where it's like, it's the top of the turn. It is literally the first activation of the turn. Is it worth it to spend these 2 13s to kill a scribe? You have to know, like, is that worth it, right? Because some totems it's not worth spending it on. The scribe, considering how many model cards you might have to discard because of that dumb model, entirely worth murdering that thing when you can.
Counterpoint though, that scribe was nowhere near the main fight, so you
It would
probably
have
could
been.
avoid
It would have been. Don't give me that nowhere near. It would have been.
But I think that
Yeah,
it's a good point about the Malifaux in general as well. That there are like killing for activation control is one of the big themes of the game right now.
Mhm.
If you don't have another way, that's the way. And so if you have to know for your keyword that you're playing, can I survive the rest of the turn if I empty out my hand? Will this go okay if I do? And some masters that's true. Some masters, oh God, what have I done?
Mhm.
And you'll experience it the rest of the turn. And I think Dreamer was a little bit of two.
Yeah. Well, I was relying on that drawing 2 cards from Agent Packs as well. So,
Yeah,
Yeah.
Act is good.
Sometimes that works for you, and sometimes that does not. It's like,
I'm gonna back up to the previous discussion about Angel Eyes for just a moment.
yeah.
Mhm.
I don't know if I'm the first person on the internet to go on record on this, but fuck that new model because goddamn,
So good.
it
So good.
is
So good.
ridiculous.
She ate a
It's
model.
ridiculous.
She ate a model a turn in that game.
And that was
I
about
mean,
the best the train could have been for me.
Yeah.
And she still ate a bottle of turn. It was awful.
Yeah.
How
It was just
how
like,
a
oh, I've got-
model can go from being arguably the worst sniper in the entire game to now probably the best sniper in the entire game.
Well, they
thanks to
gave
an
her
errata.
actual sniper tech. That's
Oh
what
my
happens.
God,
Yeah.
she's so good.
Angel Eyes has advanced sights. That's wild.
Weird. And that bonus action to just like eat, like, especially like I was playing Dreamer, I was like, okay, I'll just focus on a Daydream who's never going to use it, and I'll eat it off and then get a free focus, and then I'm shooting with 2 focus every turn. It's delicious.
Yeah,
She's
pretty
actually
good.
like a
Come to
menace.
find out.
She was a menace. She was she was difficult to deal with in that game. I did not have a crew that could deal
I
with
have
it.
to actually paint her now. Damn it. I got to go find her. I don't even know where the model is.
For Nova, I think John has one you can borrow for Nova.
Yeah.
Don't let Maeve borrow Angel Eyes.
So I guess that's kind of where we are. Is there anything that you guys want to talk about more specifically about playing your faction versus playing playing faction versus playing single? Is there any other like big thoughts or overarching thoughts that you feel like drives you towards playing these different play styles?
I would say my best piece of advice, and this would be not only to newer players or players new to a faction, like I've been kind of harping on for this whole episode, but also, tournament players or folks that are shooting for the podium, with perhaps a few exceptions of keywords that are significantly below the power curve. And I really feel like there are a very small number of those in the game right now. I would say probably 85% of the keywords in the game are perfectly serviceable and can definitely be in contention for a top table finish. Really put some thought into not only the models that you feel like have the best rules, but the models that you really feel like you're going to enjoy the most. Because they're, there are definitely some keywords out there that maybe just don't click with you. I know, Maeve, you've talked about it with me in the past where you just don't seem to be able to connect the dots with Wong.
Nope.
And I've been talking about, how I've had some good experiences with him, and I've kind of grown as a player with that keyword. You might look at that crew and say, this model is stacked. Its rules are amazing. I can totally see how this crew is good. I don't like the way it plays. Don't force yourself to play something just because the internet says that it's amazing. Pick what you really like, and most likely after you get 10 reps in, you're going to figure out how to make that keyword work into almost any situation. And then the only other thing I would say is don't get scared off of the dark horses, because there's such a dearth of models in the Malifaux meta right now that I think the dark horse card is a very significant one, and it can really catch some players off guard if you're playing something that just doesn't really see that much play, but you've got enough reps to make it work.
And that's the key, having enough reps.
Yeah. Got to get the reps in.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, like, I feel like we've maybe been like subtextually giving the, like that meme of like a bell graph where it's like on the very beginning is like, oh, I should play one keyword, and then like at the top of the graph I feel like we're saying, oh, I should pack 2 to 3 keywords, and then we go back down to the other side of the bell curve where it's like the top players like, I should play one keyword. I feel like that's actually a misrepresentation of what's actually good or not, because they're both good approaches to the game. Like being able to have those 2 to 3 keywords in your pocket to be able to say, you don't exactly know what I'm going to play, and me playing Zoraida and me playing Nakima are 2 different kinds of hell for you, and you're going to have to decide if you want to hedge your bet or not, is a fantastic way to put your opponent on the back foot immediately. So like basically what I'm trying to say is like, however we've been posing it so far, both are good approaches to the game. You just need to figure out which approach is the approach for you. What makes your brain tickle the most? Do you like picking, the right faction or the right keyword for the job, or do you like trying to get it all done with one the best you can? It really just comes down to what is the most fun.
Absolutely, I agree. So I kind of want to end the episode by talking a little bit about like, what do you think your particular future as far as Malifaux goes, Andre? You are very specifically a one keyword. Is there any keyword, especially any of the newer stuff, that you've been like, yeah, I want to try this and see where it goes? Anything brewing lately?
Honestly, I wasn't kidding. Like after that Jed's Nightmare box came out, I was like, oh, I could one trick this. I could make this work. So honestly, it's going to come down to, can I find the mechanics of the game that I need? After Maxine, I got spoiled. Being able to control cards like that is crack.
Mm-hmm.
And like going back to like normal key, like heaven forbid playing Sonya, right? We're like, oh, these are the 6 cards. They're not good. Suck it up. Like that rough, so rough. So I'm going to have to see if I can make it work, but that's certainly something that sings my name. And then apparently I think I need to one trick Von Stuck, because apparently no one else is. So
kind of wild.
I'll bring that insanity to the table.
That's going to give you the bad chemicals. Don't do
That's the
it.
path to the dark side. It's not good.
If you do play Yedza, especially Yedza 2, Sam and I both have this list that we've like kind of separately crafted to come to the same argument, that uses 2 Vatagi huntsmen, because they
don't talk about that fucking stupid
to push the pit traps into people.
Get that evil into the world.
Pit traps and push, and also the 2 of them each draw cards off each other.
Mm-hmm.
So you're bringing 16 stones, because they're 7 stones each, and you got to pay and tax them. You're bringing 16 stones for 2 models, but they're also like throwing out pit traps that Yedza can then push around and do irreducible damage with, and they're drawing you cards. It's a beauty of a list. I love it. I love it a lot.
More power to you.
Nathan, what you got?
Well, I did just, after swearing that when they nerfed Toll, I wasn't going to buy him. I told my friend that if in our practice game, if I managed to beat him, I would, with Toll 2, that I would go ahead and buy it. And I did win the game with my proxies. So now I ordered it. I have it over there to assemble now. I'm probably not leaving the keyword or not leaving the faction. Um, I need to experiment with the new sergeants. Um, and I'm starting to get the feeling that the guild mage is okay, which is a really risky drug that I'm not sure that I'm ready for.
That's
But when
cool though, because you were real salty about
I
that.
was so salty about it, but I think that's something about playing a full faction. I was not happy about nerfs, partially because I'm just an angry person, but I could accept them because I had other stuff to play. But around this errata, I just started feeling like, you know what? You all hate guild. You hate me in particular. But like these are
You-
my peeps. You got to
Yeah.
be like this. Like it, not good for me psychologically. It turns out.
Yeah, you do have a lot of like ingrained like connection to your because it is the faction that you play, and unlike like if they nerfed something that I played a lot, I would just go to something else. I mean, like I obviously still hold my candle for Sommer and will Matt got real irritated at me at Nova because I just kind of came up and was like, okay, so when are we going to talk about Big Hat? And he's like, leave me alone, right? Like I'm here to sell stuff, not talk to you.
Mhm.
But I was able to then go somewhere else because I didn't have to worry about I didn't have only that to do.
Mhm.
So that is a problem if you grab one faction to be like well, now the favorite thing that I have is gone. Like, what do I do? And Jesse, what did you learn about Nova this week that is unfortunate for you?
Oh boy. I learned that I have some work ahead of me if I'm going to compete for the Scorpius, which was originally my plan. I was going to bring my whole Bayou faction because I'm taking the train and I can do that.
Mhm.
Yeah, so took a look at the Nova Open primer document and discovered that you need to be fully painted to play models at it, and painting not my strong suit.
Oh,
Yeah, very very much in the same boat as Andre, where I kind of don't really do that a whole lot. So I've got a couple of weeks and a couple of bottles of speed paint and a little bit of learning to do, where I'm going to have to prep some models to be able to play them at Nova, which is going to be great fun. In terms of stuff that I plan to focus on, I have gotten enough games in at this point with Red Library that I really feel like there's some serious gas in that tank. I fully intend after Nova's done, because I've already committed to playing Bayou for that, that I'm going to put a significant amount of time into Red Library and hopefully have it ready and feel confident enough playing both versions of the Master at the Lone Star Showdown.
Keyword looks
And it
so
is
good.
entirely possible that I might end up one tricking Red Library at that event, which would
Nice.
be pretty freaking dope. It's going to be really hard for me to keep my hands off the Last Blossom keyword because they hold a very special place in my heart. But that I think might be the move. And that's probably relegating myself to another one of those solid mid-table finishes. But I feel like I'm picking up what they're putting down, and I think there's a lot to it.
No.
Nice.
Yeah, that Lindley crew, it's just gorgeous. It's just that whole crew looks awesome.
That's a very
And
cool vibe.
yeah, and you definitely, Jesse, picked up on it really quickly. Like the games that we've played on it, like you really went for it very quickly when everybody else was kind of going, I don't think this is great. You were like, nope, we're gonna do this and see what happens, and
Yeah.
that's
Well,
awesome.
when you have stuff like Tull and Damien to compete against, it's
Yeah.
not hard to fall into that kind of last place slot for the Madness of
Yeah.
Malifaux
Yeah.
stuff. But yeah, I feel like they've been treating me well, and I'm looking forward to hopefully a good finish with them at the event.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think I am, of course, I'm playing Neverborn at Nova. I've got Castor boxes are supposed to be here this week, so I could hopefully get them knocked out. If I don't get him knocked out, he's going to stay at home, which will be kind of sad, unless somebody else up there has him and I can bug them into let me use the models. But I think obviously we don't know when keyword reworks are going to show up. So of course, when Sommer comes out, I'm obviously going to play it quite a bit, but I think as of next year, I am either looking at touching the one faction that I have not played in 3rd edition, which is Thunders, or going back and trying some guild stuff and seeing if anything in guild really sticks for me. The last couple times I've tried to play guild, I've enjoyed it well enough, but nothing really just had me gravitate towards it the same way that Neverborn and Bayou does. There was nothing in guild that I was just like, oh, this is the thing that I want to play. I do like Bass. I think Bass is a lot of fun. The Frontier Forward is not good. It's just not good. It needs some serious work. So I'll wait till they do a little work on that, I think, before I roll around there. But I might pick up some Thunder stuff, and Yanlo looks really interesting. It looks like a puzzle to solve, so we'll see. But Nova is the next big thing. If I can ever, tie down those keywords that I want to play, like Nightmare's definitely there. Like I did pretty good with them in Houston. I feel pretty comfortable with them. Nekima is fun, especially with the Hound changes.
Oh yeah,
feels really, really good. Being able to just poop out hounds, and then maybe you can actually use the list that just flings hounds at people. Like that sounds kind of fun. Just oh, here's this guy that you have to deal with who's real annoying. That's just going to bleed all over you if you deal with him. And put corpses up the board where I want them to be to heal with later.
My favorite part is being able to feed Enraged by Insolence. It finally is good. You're like, you kicked my dog, die. Can't wait.
Go full John Wick on their ass.
Don't touch my puppies.
Yeah, I would say just kind of piggyback on one of the things you said about guild there. This is just a little editorializing from me, but I feel like guild is probably the faction that we've seen evolve the most from when 3rd edition released to the state that it's in right now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it used to be that guild had some very narrow strengths when the game first released, and they got kind of dogged on as the faction that was in kind of the worst spot. And I honestly, I feel like that faction has evolved to the point that they are every bit as good as any other faction on the table and are vying for, top slot. They just have all the tools that they need, and it's taken a while for him to get there, but Nathan's patience has been rewarded.
Yeah. I mean, just the addition of Rocketeers, right? Having a flight model in the faction is big. You had Watchers before, and it used to drive me freaking nuts every time a guild player was like, well, we don't have any flight. And I'm like, you have a move 6 armor 2 4 cost. What?
7, but no, we don't have them. They don't exist.
They don't exist?
No, I use them in my Hoffman, but they are incredibly difficult to use. I found you really have to know your opponent's threat ranges so well.
Yeah,
and that's where I find them to be they're very mentally taxing to use in a way that I don't really value.
Also, Hoffman players that don't use the puppies, I don't understand. Those things are so good.
Are the hunters?
Yeah. They're fantastic.
Yeah, no, they're awesome.
Fantastic.
Yeah, cry some more about Watchers when I look at my flying piglets and be like, yeah, these guys are great.
Yeah.
Move 5 flight with no armor and no defensive tech. Still use them all the time, though.
But those guys also, those little guys, they also end up being able to skirt sometimes the edges of the board, that it almost becomes more effort for someone to have to go after them than they're worth. And so a lot of times those guys can squeeze by and getting the points that you need them to, especially for a 4.5 point model, whatever, even though they're easy to kill. If you're sending, if your opponent's not packed with guns, right, to shoot them from range, if they're sending models over to go kill them, sometimes that's worth the points that they cost in the first place just to take models that far away. or those models just get ignored because we just can't spend the time to go after them.
Yeah,
And they still do exactly what you wanted them to. So I like those little models.
I know. I'm being a smartass. I use them all the
Yeah.
time. They're the Bayou version of corrupted hounds. They're just not as fast. But 3 stones, 4 wounds, flight instead of move 6, and nimble. Yeah, they get the job done. It's good stuff.
And they have bacon
Anyway,
too, right?
they do have bacon.
Yeah. So they become scheme markers, which is important.
Yes.
All right then. Are there any closing remarks? Anybody got anything they want to say?
Long may the God Empress reign.
Yeah,
I'll try to
you
do.
had
I'll
get that
try
in,
to
didn't
do
you?
her justice. I'll send you my picture. I just finished Nekima 2. She looks fantastic.
Yeah, come play with us at Nova. We're gonna have a great time.
Yeah,
Or play
I
with
would
them
say if
at
anybody
Texas.
wants to drive out to Massachusetts, I will give you as much free beer as you want if you help me paint my models for Nova.
If I live,
And since I'm probably not going to get this episode posted until like the week before Nova, you've got a couple of days for me to make good on that promise. But yeah.
Nice.
if I live closer, I would knock them out for you. But that's by the time you mailed them to me and I mailed them back to you, I would probably just have brought them with me to Nova.
Yes.
But yeah, guys, thanks once again for coming on the show tonight. I really always appreciate your insights when you show up. So
Yeah, definitely.
it's just good to talk Malifaux for a night. So
Heck
Yeah, a
yeah.
lot of fun.
And
Thanks, sir.
with all that said, keep your conversations boring and stay weird, folks. Hey, everybody. I'm Jesse.
I'm Maeve.
I'm Nathan.
And I'm Andre.
And this is the first time that we haven't ever had to Oh, I fucked that up.
Gorgeous.
And
Gorgeous
I can't do it now because I already fucked it up. And this is Boring Conversation.